It's 3:05, so let's get started with this next edition of Caring for Caregivers Mental Health Program. And today is very special because I don't know how many of you know this, but March is considered many other social media holidays too, but the one that we kind of align with and attach to and celebrate is that of a social worker month. And we know that social work plays such an important part of providing support for our families and support for our families at the most critical time of need. And not just direct support by the one-on-one time with the social worker and the patient and or the patient's, surrounding kind of family and or community, but also the role of advocacy that many social workers play in connecting families, patients to a larger community of support and setting them up for, success, right? This program was born out of Mickie's Miracles recognition that being a caregiver for a medically complex child is hard.
Yeah.
And there's no other way to say that it's hard. And we saw that there was a lot of conversation around the issue, but not a lot of resources specifically that could provide practical coping skills for caregivers of medically complex children. And although Mickie's Miracles is primarily pediatric epilepsy, we wanted to provide a program in mental health support that was open to all caregivers of medically complex children, because
new visitor,
the kind of ramifications, the impact, the consequences, the shared journey is very similar along the mental health. There's the grief, there's the anger, there's the PTSD, there's, varying degrees of mental health challenges that are present, whether your child suffers from this ailment or a different ailment
visitor
that can be impactful, from that perspective. So we want to thank our sponsors. Without their support, this program is not possible. Jazz Pharmaceuticals is our primary sponsor, and Neurelis has been a fantastic partner as well. So we're so grateful for their foresight and vision in understanding the importance of these conversations and these kinds of community engagement tools for mental health. And we also want to thank our facilitator. His name is Emilio Prieto, or Emilio Prieto, if you don't speak Spanish. And in the context of Social Work Month, he's a social worker, a very active social worker in a very busy level 2 hospital trauma center environment, and has a lot of direct experience working with caregiving and caregivers from a mental health perspective when it's most acute, in a trauma kind of emergent type environment. And what's unique about Emilio also is that he has, direct experience with caregiving for epilepsy. His grandmother, and I'll let him share more, but his grandmother has epilepsy. His mom has been the primary caregiver, and he's experienced that relationship on top of also providing care. So I think he has a unique perspective to that. So without any kind of further delay, Emilio, thank you for joining us. We're so grateful that in the month of social work, we could have a working, active social worker in a medical environment join us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Dario. Like I said earlier, I think the opportunity to share with Mickie's Miracles, the more I looked into your nonprofit, the more I looked into your mission, the more I realized, man, these people are devoted to doing the right thing when it's hard. And as a social worker, I'm so aligned with that. And then the additional layer of just kind of the foundation caring for epilepsy and families that are living through epilepsy. Yeah, you named it. I mean, my family's been living through that since I was a kid, since as long as I could remember. And so happy to share some knowledge, happy to share some experience with a foundation that I feel like is really aligned with what I feel called to do in this life too. So,
right.
I think with that, I'll kind of get into like what I do. I think you named that I'm a social worker in the community. I work as a medical social worker in San Diego County. I work with patients and families to listen, support, and resource them. And you named it as well. I work in an acute setting. So most of my job is connecting patients in the moment with community resources that'll best serve their needs. Those needs can range from anything from like access to mental health care, whether that's counseling or psychology or even psychiatry out in the community. It can also be access to things like caregiving resources out in the community. Hey, here's some caregiver brokers that you should connect with to get support as you look to support a loved one. But really, it's just about like listening to the patient. What do they got going on? How can I support as a social worker? And knowing that I'm just a touch point on the line of care that people are really experiencing when it comes to especially these long-term diseases and illnesses. And so knowing, hey, what's not just going to support them right here in this moment, but what's going to get them where they need to be, which is just health and support and having adequate resources. On a personal note, like we said prior, I watched my mom. I watched my mom as she's a primary caregiver for my grandmother, who also lives with dementia along with epilepsy. And so in some ways it is almost like pediatric level of care where you're rationalizing, you're explaining, you're helping with compliance, you're just kind of keeping my grandmother, who doesn't really know a ton of what's going on, keeping her in line, because we know that epilepsy is such a regimented illness that it helps when you have a good understanding of it. It helps you treat it more effectively for sure. And then I think I think with that, it's like, this is what I do for a living, but it's also just my mom. Like, that's my mom, right? And how do I love on my mom as she tries to love on my grandma? A lot of it has been just listening to my mom when she has the hard days that we all have, especially as caregivers, caring for her and asking her, like, what do you need right now? On a personal level, just as a son. It's also putting on my social work hat and saying, like, hey, mom, have you tapped into this resource? Are you aware of in-home support services? Are you aware of this caregiving resource? Are you aware of this program that you could take in? And I mean, that's when I kind of take off that personal hat and I say, like, professionally, mom, like, how do I support you as a social worker, right? Like, she just happens to be lucky to have a son that is a social worker, but I think as her son, my primary role is just to listen, because taking care of people is hard, and taking care of medically complex individuals is even harder. So it's kind of wearing both at those times. But yeah, I think that's my journey as far as like professionally working in a hospital and in that acute setting, and then more long-term personally, just with my mom and my grandma as they navigate what it looks like to live with epilepsy. And unfortunately for them, be in and out of ICUs and in and out of care facilities. It's like, that's exhausting work. So how do I support? How do I be there just as a grandson as well?
Yeah, and that's what really kind of stood out as we were having our conversations. I know you're going to get into the substance of your programming, but it's not often that we have someone with that kind of walk of life, practicing social worker in an environment that sees all kinds of different emergencies, including epilepsy emergencies, and seeing the impact and the ripples it has, not just on the patient, but on the people who love the patient, who support the patient, who are there for the patient. And then obviously your personal experience, really connects you to this in a way that a lot of folks aren't connected to this. And we were having a casual conversation before we started officially, but to us, it's still surprising that so few are aware of how impactful and how broad epilepsy is, and how damaging it can be, and how it can destroy someone's quality of life, whether they're an infant who's just starting out, or someone having epilepsy seizure attacks later in life. But I think your personal experience with that, I think, will serve our community well.
Totally. And I think I mean, to shift back to like professionally, like the damaging part is there, right? We know that seizures and even just recovering from seizures is such a journey. And we even know that managing epilepsy is a journey, right? The regimen, the being on it, the constant care, the worrying, right? Like, what if I'm not there and they have a seizure? Or what if I'm not there and something happens? That takes a toll on a person. And I think we're in this room because it takes a toll on the community and it takes a toll on the family. And so as a social worker in the hospital, whenever I'm meeting with anybody, especially families who are deep in the waters of caregiving and supporting, I tend to just offer similar resources throughout. But for anybody living through this, we know that it's stressful. We know that it's anxiety inducing. And so One of the first things I always recommend to either somebody living with chronic illness or somebody supporting someone else living in chronic illness is, hey, what does a processing space look like for you? I always encourage seeking professional help. In the moment when I'm in a hospital meeting with a family that's just gone through a medical emergency, or meeting with a family that is living out one of their worst days. I mean, being in a hospital can be some of your worst experiences in life. I sit and I process and I listen to the depth of how painful and how hard that can be. But I know that they're only getting me for what, 30 minutes to an hour. And so my thing is like, hey, how do we keep this up? If this conversation of processing and support has been super helpful, how do we plug you into long-term therapy? How do we get you in with a counselor to share and process how hard some of these things are? I always recommend going through your insurance if you have it, checking in with your insurance, asking, hey, how do I get connected with a mental health provider? And then there's also really helpful sites like psychology.com, right? Just go on there, you type where you live, you type what insurance you have, you type even what you're looking for. And there's helpful filtering websites that can help you find a clinician that can support you or your family as you navigate this stuff. The other thing I recommend is joining a support group. So many times people living with chronic illness can feel isolated, they can feel alone, they can feel scared. And when I mention support groups, it's like, oh, wait, other people are going through this. I can sit down in a circle or even in a Zoom just like this and share and listen and be heard and be seen by people who are navigating the same challenges and overcoming the same experiences that I'm overcoming. Everybody's story is different, but it's helpful to sit with the similarities and know that you're not alone. So, I mean, that's a Google search away. Hey, childhood complex diseases, or even like a Google search of like childhood epilepsy groups near me. Most of them meet at churches, most of them meet in community buildings. They're all over. And a lot of them are online nowadays. I mean, COVID was rough, but the one thing that it created was community online. And I'm seeing so many support groups go that direction. This right here is one of them, right? Like this space, this honestly sacred space to sit and learn with each other and learn from each other is what those groups are for. And then the last thing I recommend is find time for you. Engage self-care activities. And that's kind of where we get into this next kind of mental health checklist that I use with patients, and a practice that I encourage patients to engage with. But I think those two spaces that I described earlier are pretty valuable, whether that's an individual space to process what you're going through as a family or just as a caregiver, and then a group space to process with other people going through it, right? Those are pretty paramount when it comes to mental health as a caregiver, I would say. That last piece, I think, tops it all. Taking time for yourself, right? What does it look like to take time for me? I think engaging in self-care is one, and we'll kind of get into that like next. But before we get into that, I want to address, why do we even need self-care, right? Like why does that even exist? What's that even for? There's this term that I learned about in my master's of social work program called compassion fatigue. Another word for that is also burnout, right? Compassion fatigue is exactly what it sounds like. It's when, I mean, you're a caregiver. If you're a caregiver for somebody, obviously you are a very compassionate person. You're in tune with someone else's needs. You're facilitating someone else's needs. That is awesome and beautiful work. And we're lying to ourselves if we don't claim it as exhausting. And so compassion fatigue is a word for that exhaustion. It's a name for that exhaustion. And it takes away the power of that exhaustion. It says that it's something common enough to have a name, right? First and foremost, don't judge it. Don't judge it. Compassion is a resource just like any other. And as much as we want it to be endless, it's just not. It's not. I've experienced this as a social worker. I mean, there's some days I go into the hospital and I love my job at the hospitals. I love that I get to meet people where they're at, support and resource them. And yet there's some days I come in and I'm tired. I'm exhausted, or I'm irritable, or that one really complex case just gets hard to pick up, right? That's when I know, like, okay, my compassion fatigue is setting in as a working profession, right? I see it in my own mom with my grandmother. I see it in how she calls me and she's tired or she's frustrated, and she has so much shame about feeling that. And yet I have to encourage her and remind her, like, Mom, no, you've been doing this for a long time. It's only natural to feel tired. Um, and so I'll get into kind of signs and symptoms that I see, and that are pretty common for compassion fatigue. And that's irritability and lower mood than usual, right? Something that gets to you that normally doesn't get to you, but that day it just gets to you, right? Low mood, low motivation or lack thereof, right? That one task or that one reminder that just is hard to sit with today. Difficulty focusing on those tasks, heightened anxiety or reactivity to things. And then just feeling fatigued more often than not, feeling exhausted, feeling tired. Oftentimes, if you wake up that way, right, that can be a sign that you're going through some compassion fatigue or some burnout. How do we address it? How do we tackle compassion fatigue? How do we tackle burnout? First and foremost, name it. Name how you're feeling. Name that you are tired. Name that you are feeling a little burnt out. The best way to tackle it is to engage it with non-judgment, and then to do self-care, to engage in some good self-care. That is one of the biggest combatants to compassion fatigue and burnout. But it starts by naming it, right? I tell patients and clients that I work with all the time, I call it taking self-inventory. Hey, take an inventory of what you got going on. Take self-inventory today. Another way of looking at it is just like a mental health check-in, a checklist, or just like a self-care checklist, if you need to call it that. But it takes a minute, it takes 5 minutes, it takes however long you can or need to give it that day. I know life is busy, and life is even more busy when you're caring for someone else's needs, let alone your own. But if you're not giving yourself a minute to 5 minutes of your day, then I would argue we got to change something. But it takes a minute. And so, I mean, Dario, we can try it here, but I'll just kind of name what the questions are, and maybe we can try it with you, Dario, on how you're feeling today. But I think the first
I'm
question,
open to that. I think, listen, part of
yeah,
what I created this was to provide some general guidelines, but also to show it in practice,
yeah,
and to model what that practice is. And we've heard similar themes throughout other presentations. Definitely asking for help,
yes,
receiving help,
yes,
important. Dealing with the shame, right? So saying it out loud so that power of that shame is reduced.
yeah,
Connecting to a community of support, beyond you, whether it's local or online or whatever that is.
yeah,
It's just something I think pretty interesting, because one of the things we hear often, you said, allow time for self-care, and time is such a subjective thing.
I
And
know.
we hear from parents a lot,
Mhm,
and from caregivers a lot, is, how can I make time for myself
mhm.
when I have this vulnerable being depending on me for everything? And time for myself theoretically takes time away from,
Yeah,
child, or that, person you care for.
mhm.
But it's not a zero sum game,
No,
right? It's
yeah,
not, you provide time for yourself. The way I look at it is, it's not you provide time for yourself, so you take time away. No, you
mhm.
provide time for yourself, so you give more quality time,
Yes,
and
yes, yep,
more present, intentional, compassionate, time that really is going to be more impactful than if you're sleep deprived, full of anxiety,
exactly, yeah,
with 8 different things because you didn't move that day, or you didn't meditate that day, or you didn't fill in the
mhm,
blank that day, that works when you're feeling some of
yeah,
those things. So I'm game to jump in,
yeah,
for mental
yeah.
health story for sure.
It can feel so counterintuitive, but you're right. By taking time for yourself, you're being a better caregiver because you're modeling what you would do for your person for yourself.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we could do this in a couple minutes, Dario. This is how I do it with clients and
Yeah.
patients, but I think internalize this. If you're watching this, ask these questions of yourself. If it helps to journal on it, journal on it. But it's a minute. You can do it before your person is awake. You can do it while they're taking a nap. It is so brief that there is a window somewhere that you can take. And so I'll just ask you, Dario, like, how are you feeling today? How are you feeling today?
So I'm feeling grateful.
Okay.
I'm grateful for, the professional responsibilities that I have.
Mhm.
I'm grateful for the relationship I have, with my children, and I'm grateful for the support that I'm connected to,
Yeah.
both personally and professionally. And I'm dealing with some personal things that I'd rather not kind of get into,
Yeah.
that are cause for anxiety, cause for
Yeah.
anxiousness. And if I allow myself to think about it too far along,
Mhm, mhm.
can kind of be overwhelming. So I'm mindful of that. So I'm doing my best to be in the present,
Mhm.
express gratitude, but also recognizing that that feeling of anxiousness isn't too far away.
Mhm. Yeah. You did the last step first, and I love it. You opened with gratitude, which is awesome. And you also were honest about feeling some levels of anxiety today, and that's okay, right? The important part is, and what I wanted to model by doing this is by looking at that feeling with no judgment, by
Mhm.
just acknowledging that that feeling exists within us, it is there. I'm not going to judge it. I'm just going to be aware of it. And so in being aware of that feeling, Dario, what are you needing today? And as you ponder that question, I'll ask 2 follow-up questions that can help you answer that better. And that would be, what's bringing you back to the present moment? And what is life giving to you? And so I'll let you sit with those as I ask you the question, what are you needing today?
I think just no, I think I know that what I need is just to remind myself that this journey isn't always easy.
Yeah.
And that's part of the journey.
Mhm.
Being a parent, being a spouse, being a business owner,
Mhm.
being a leader in a nonprofit that deals with very difficult things.
Yeah.
We're going to come across things that are hard,
Mhm.
and that's okay.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know, and the more we can kind of stay in the present, and that's one of my challenges, is stay in the present.
Yeah.
But really kind of just what I need is to remind myself things are hard sometimes, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And those feelings are temporary. The situation might not be able to change immediately,
Mhm.
but I'm surviving. I'm blessed. I have, a great family. I have great children. I have a great career. There's so much to be, thankful for,
Mhm.
that really just a reminder that,
Yeah.
life can be hard, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I mean, if I can offer you this permission for life to be hard. I feel like so often we expect life to just go our way. And so often, especially even with dealing with illness, we can use the permission for this just to be hard today. And so I'll offer you that permission. And I'm glad that you are offering that to yourself,
Thank you.
right? Permission to just have a rough day,
Yeah.
right? We can take that. That's okay. And so in that permission, Dario, I'll ask you, what would it look like to do something loving and kind for yourself today?
That's a great question. I am definitely going to move today. I'm going
Okay.
to set aside time after work to get to the gym and throw around some weights and
Yes.
some movement, and it also looks like good nutrition tonight, and taking care of my body in a way that honors the hard work of the day and the hard work physically that I'm going to put myself through at the gym.
Mhm.
And then having a night routine that is full of self-care, instead of staying on electronics too late, and or doing things that I know are counterproductive to healthy sleep.
Mhm.
Giving myself the room to have a nice wind down kind of process, do the routine that I know works, so I can get a good night's rest, and wake up fresh for whatever beauty tomorrow has to offer.
Yeah. And sometimes it's as simple as that, right? People can think like, well, I don't have time to go to that yoga class. I don't have time to meditate for an hour today. I don't have time to read 30 pages of the book that I'm on. But you have time to be intentional about what you make for dinner tonight, because you're going to do that anyway. Or
Yeah.
go pick up dinner. Like, you know what I mean? Like, whatever it is to love and be kind to yourself today, do that. And so I'm happy that you're doing that by taking time to go to the gym and being intentional about what you're making yourself for dinner tonight. I know that you're going to enjoy that dinner even more because you've described how intentional you're going to be about it. And then the last thing is, Dario, which you've been doing all throughout this whole time, is what is something you're grateful for today? And you named it, but would love to just end there, because I love that you opened with it, but I think it's always great to end with gratitude too.
Yeah, listen, I'm grateful for how blessed I am.
Yeah.
You know, even when the days are hard, I have incredible children, I have an incredible career. I get to work with families that we get to help at a very serious, intentional, helpful level. And we're surrounded by a team of folks and a community of parents and caregivers and advocates that will do everything to see these babies get the care that they deserve.
Thank God.
And that's a lot to be grateful for. I mean,
Yeah.
to be able to change the course of a child's life, to the work that Christy Gree started, CEO and visionary founder, and through her experience as a parent with Michaela,
Yeah.
and to be entrusted, with the responsibility that the Grease family has entrusted me with to support them in their work on behalf of families. I mean, there's a lot of room for gratitude, and there's a lot of room for just acknowledging how beautiful this journey I get to go on every day, with these families is. Just having this conversation is room for to be grateful, because I know conversations like this give other people to have the permission to have conversations like this and to acknowledge, hey, this is hard and I need help. And that's an important, both those steps are incredibly important. The acknowledgement and then the ask or the receiving of help.
Yeah.
If we can just do that for 1, 2, 3 people, that's something else to be incredibly grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I mean, that's awesome. I love those 2 things. I'll add the third, and that's non-judgment.
Yeah.
Just non-judgment. Acknowledge that this is hard, ask for help, and you don't judge yourself, because as caregivers, all you want to do is be helpful, and all you want to do is serve. And sometimes the most humbling and hardest thing to do is to accept that for yourself. And so I would just lean into that non-judgment every time, of acknowledging that it is hard and I do need help, and I'm not going to judge myself for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's such a great perspective, Emilio.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is what I do, I sit with my clients, I sit with my patients, I sit with their caregivers, and I ask those questions, right? What does self-care look like for you? How are you feeling today? What are you needing today? And when you're thinking of that, what brings you back to the present moment? What is life-giving for you? What could it look like to do something loving and kind for yourself today? And then what is something that you're grateful for today? That is something I do in the moment when I process with them. And then I point to those resources, right? I point to those resources and I say, get plugged in. And so my biggest encouragement, and what I want to kind of leave your audience with is that if you have a person receiving care from either an outpatient facility, a clinic, a hospital, chances are they have a social worker employed. Find out who that social worker is, talk with them, let them know your story, and then let them advocate for you, because they are there for that. This is what I do. This is what we do as social workers. We're on your team if you let us. And so the biggest encouragement is just let us be on your team.
Yeah, I love that. At Mickey's Miracles, we pride ourselves in our advocacy. And our advocacy starts with getting families into the highest level of care as urgently as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Diagnosis and treatment.
And
then we say we lovingly wrap our arms around that family for every step of the journey thereafter, including conversations like this and support programs like this.
Yeah.
And if we can, take a couple questions, if that's okay with you, Emilio.
Of course.
It's interesting, in a setting like this where, like, I don't have right now a child that I have to care for that is fighting for his or her life, so I think, and I don't want to judge it, but just outside looking in, it could be a little bit easier for me. Stop, pause, make the time to go work out, make the time to be intentional, but for a family member that is in it, and just got a tough diagnosis, or another medication protocol failed, and seizures are spiking, and how can you impress upon them the importance of taking that time and really kind of applying some of these things that we're talking about today without them feeling the shame or the guilt of it, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we are lucky, right? That self-care for us can look like getting some time at the gym, or we have those gaps in our day. I would argue that just self-care is important enough that it can take the hour that you would need at the gym, and it can also take the 5 minutes that you can get alone, right? Whether you just put your child down for a nap, or you just finished a meal time and they're okay, they're just chilling there, or like um, or you just have a minute to breathe. That 1 minute to breathe and just ask yourself the simple question of, what am I needing today? That is self-care. And that is something that everybody can afford no matter what. It could be as simple as, I need to drink more water today. I'm feeling really dehydrated. But if you go into that intention, like, I'm going to drink more water, but I'm doing it with the intention of caring for myself. Immediately, you just took a simple task, like finishing your water bottle, and you added a therapeutic element to it because you made it for you and about you. But it could be that simple, right?
The other question that I think is useful, because you are a practicing active social worker in a medical environment, is how can we engage social workers? How can our families engage social workers to really advocate on their behalf? And either connect them resources, or really just get someone to listen, and validate the journey and the experience these families are experiencing. So, how does how does a caregiver get a social worker to not just engage, but to convert them from, like a passive listener potentially, although I know social workers aren't passive listeners, they're empathic listeners,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
to take them from empathic listeners to impassioned advocates.
Yeah. First and foremost, find out who your social worker is. Whatever environment that you're in, talk to your nurse. Your nurse is always your front line in a medical setting. Say, hey, nurse so-and-so, could I get orders to talk to social work? They will plug that into their system, and that will queue an order for myself or someone to see you and talk to you. Okay. That's how you get the ball rolling, right? The way that you engage and get us to go from just an empathic listener processing with you is just ask what's out there. Let us know, hey, I'm having a really hard time navigating XYZ. What's out there that can support me? Your social worker's job is not to know in that moment, but to go back, do a little bit of research, and then come back to you with some options, some leads. In all honesty, that looks like us Google searching community resources. It looks like us connecting with our partners in the community to find out what they offer. And so your social worker might need to get educated on it too. But if you're specific about what you need or what you're feeling, then that gives them the best possible lead to find out how to advocate for you. And then I think just be willing to accept the help offered, right? Social workers are generalists for the most part in a medical setting. And so they'll come to you with a lot of different resources from general backgrounds. Name what's helpful, name what's not, because the more specific you are about how we can serve you, the better we can serve you.
Yeah, thank you. And, I can't tell you how grateful we are to have, someone with your practical and personal experience, join us. And I hope you'll join us again. I think this has been, really helpful. And I know that just from my knowledge of our community and from how close we are, we've provided some opportunities for them to kind of take inventory and some actionable steps that they can take on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And sometimes this is the final question is, I think it's probably harder to take that inventory when you're really in it, but you're not always in it. There is a break. I wonder what your thoughts are in those moments of quietness or in those gaps. Is it just as effective, or can it be an opportunity to do those kind of inventories, so that when something does happen, you have arrows in your quiver, you're more prepared, for whatever, mental health challenges are going to be brought on by that particular episode. So in those gaps, how effective is it to do some of these things that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's when it's most important, right? It's when you have the space, when you have the moment to breathe, right? Because it's when you look around and you're like, oh, whoa, I have a second to breathe. Where if you're anything like me and you're an anxious person, you immediately find something else to jump on, when really it could be a good opportunity for you to just take inventory with yourself, because that then prepares you for those moments when you don't have the space, right? You're building up that reservoir of self-care and self-compassion so that when those moments challenge you and get you closer to fatigue, you have reserves to lean into, right? It's important. I know you guys already had the podcast before of not pouring out of an empty cup, right? It's those moments when you look around and you breathe and you say like, oh, wait, I have a minute. Let me fill my cup and let me ask myself how I'm going to do that right now.
Thank you. That's, I think, a great transition to the conclusion of this conversation. Thank you, Emilio Prieto, a practicing social worker with a very personal connection to epilepsy, as a caregiver, as a son of a caregiver as well. And thank you for your insights. And again, we thank our sponsors. Without them, this isn't possible. Our medical advisory board, our board of directors, their support has been invaluable in creating the Caring for Caregivers program. And then the reception and the feedback we get from the community at large, the community that we, were founded to serve, and that level of trust and support that we can offer for the families going through, tough stuff. Our hearts are with you. We are always mindful of the journey. We are prayerful for you and your family, and we're grateful that we get to provide level of resources that we hope are impactful and supportive of your journey. And we're always here. You can find us at mickiesmiracles.org. You can always message us on social media. We're Mickie's Miracles on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. And we want to know your thoughts. If there's a particular topic or a question that wasn't answered that you'd like attention given to, please know this organization exists for you. These conversations exist for you. And with that, we'll bring this episode to a close with gratitude, and really signing off with an opportunity to just be grateful for the community that we get to serve every day.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dario. And it's been an honor and a privilege to share this time with Mickie's Miracles too. So
Thank you.